next meeting. Anyway, I'm Jim Hammond. I'm the president of the Squirrel Hill Historical Society. And this program is being recorded, so if you have questions, just remember you're going to might be on camera, or at least on the Zoom. And I'm going to cut it short because we're running behind here. But I want to thank all of our members for their support. Pardon? Oh, that's it. I want to thank all of our members for all your support, because you help us buy the equipment that works.
We have a comedian.
Things will get better. So really, I'm going to cut it short, and I'm going to have Helen, our vice president, talk about a couple things, and some of the projects we're working on. And Helen, take it away.
Hi, everyone. As you know, I said that we're trying a new system today, and nothing seems to run perfectly the first time. But we got this far. So anyway, the few things I wanted to say was our calendar is out, and it's $25 because it's a fundraiser between us and the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition. They will be marketing this online and at some of the stores in Squirrel Hill. Otherwise, especially 10,000 Villages, maybe Little's, Games Unlimited. So if you don't get it tonight, you can get it at our meetings. You can get it at the night market on September 28th, I think. 27. Farmers markets. So it's out there. So if you want to take a look at it, it's over there, and check it out. It makes a great holiday gift. Audrey and I put it together with Tom Engel's help. He's a photographer. There he goes. He's doing the taping. Audrey can't be here. Second thing, this is exciting. Turner Cemetery History Walk that we have had for 16 years. This year we decided to have it at the Neal Log House because Robert Neal was living at the same time that the first people who were buried at Turner Cemetery were living. So we're going to have it at the Neal Log House so people can see how the settlers lived, not just were buried. So that's on October the 5th, and this is one of the posters. So mark that on your calendar, 12:30 to 3 at the Neal Log House. And lastly, very quickly, if you get Shady Ave magazine, there's a really, really good write-up about the Neal Log House in it. So if you don't want your copy after you read it, we'll take it for archival purposes, but otherwise keep it and archive it because it's, the editor, John Allison, did a wonderful presentation. The next thing is to introduce our speaker, but since I didn't arrange that with you, you'll have to interview yourself.
Okay.
But I do have to say that Randy and I have known each other for a long time. We take Tai Chi together, and but I know you're a professor, but that's about it. So Randy will take it from here.
So my name is Randy Weinberg, and thank you for inviting me. I'm just really thrilled to be here. I taught information systems at CMU for many years, and one of my interests was in cartography, maps, map making, and using maps to tell stories. And this story that we're going to hear tonight was something that I really was not aware of until, I would say, about 10 years ago. I was teaching one of my classes on maps and map making and map reading and storytelling. And I came across this, and I thought this would be a really interesting kind of a topic to discuss with my class. And so I've also turned it into a couple of lectures, which I've done for Osher and so on. So I think you'll find it very interesting. And those of you that are Pittsburgh historians, please forgive my errors and omissions. We've only been here 27 years, so I'm really into this. So those of you, that are lifelong here, you will know stories about neighborhoods and history and specific incidences and so on that I wouldn't know. So I hope you find this as interesting as I have. So, as we begin, let me see if I can, now this doesn't seem to want to go. Let's see. What's my problem here now? There we go. So I'm going to warn you that some of the material we're going to be looking at is rather raw. And if your vision is good, you'll be able to read what's up here. And it will pain me at times to read this to you, but I'm assuming that not everybody has great vision. So I'm going to do my best, but realize I'm reading source documents. So this is not, you know, me making anything up or anything like that. So we'll see if we can get into it. So where does the story begin? So redlining itself was a product of the 1930s, but we know the story really begins during the Great Depression. And during this depression, there was a lot of despair. There was a lot of hunger. There was tremendous unemployment, or had homes that they were renting. In the 1920s, there was this unbelievable real estate bubble because this was the go-go years, and nothing could stop it. Well, come the Depression, and a lot of these homes are, to use the current expression, underwater. Mortgages can't be paid, and people are finding themselves, essentially homeless and losing their properties. These are some pictures of the Depression, again, just to sort of remind us of what conditions were like for a whole lot of people. So this here on my upper right is ironing and washing, and you can see children in the window. So, and people living in tents and encampments. It was really a very, very grim time. So we begin the story in the 1930s, and this is like 90-some years ago already. And Franklin Roosevelt, elected in 1932, takes office in January. But no, I guess it wasn't January back then. I think it was in March of 1933. And here he is driving the engine to get people out of despair, to help them with their mortgages, to help them find employment, to reform banking. And during his first 100 days, it was remarkable. Congress passed 15 major bills, which in his first 100 days, which is a record that, to my knowledge, is unsurpassed. Some of these bills included the Civilian Conservation Corps, Tennessee Valley Authority, some housing developments. He also signed a bill making 3.2% beer legal, because it was still during the era of Prohibition. And he has this famous quote, I think he used like during one of his fireside chats, says, we could really use a beer right now. He was a man of absolute action. Well, people were weighted down by these mortgages. So think of these as huge weights. So again, think of this massive real estate bubble, and people had these mortgages, and back then, mortgages were typically offered by private lenders, and they would have a short span, maybe 5 years, and then a massive balloon. And of course, after the real estate bubble burst, the value of their homes and houses came down, but yet they're still stuck with these massive mortgages and impending balloon payments coming up. And typically, then you'd have to put down maybe 40% or 50% to get a private mortgage. And then, when you're stuck underwater, what are you going to do? So here's President Roosevelt in the peak of good health with his rifle. He's going to try to shoot down some of these massive mortgages and make life a little bit better for millions and millions, literally millions of people. One of the major acts of the first 100 days was the creation of this homeowners loan corporation. So by the early 1930s, people were losing their homes and farms at the rate of about 1,000 a day. And these bad debts rippled through the economy. So not only people couldn't pay their mortgages and own their properties, and there were foreclosures, but there was no collection of taxes. The construction industry was basically at a standstill. Banks were just on the verge of collapsing because they were stuck with all this bad debt. So just imagine the whole thing ripples. Local taxes, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars were not collected because people lost their homes, they didn't have money. President Roosevelt basically established this with the idea of helping people with their mortgages through no fault of their own that were at risk of losing their properties. So the Homeowners Loan Corporation, it had a charter to last for 3 years. And they actually did not make loans directly to homeowners or consumers. What they did was they actually made loans to lending institutions and banks that had all this debt that could not be serviced. So for instance, if you owed maybe $10,000 on a home, and you couldn't pay it, rather than foreclose on it, the HOLC would come in and they would buy that loan from the bank at 90%. So if you owed $10,000, they would come in and refinance like 9,000 of it. The bank would have to swallow the other 1,000. But they were federally guaranteed loans. So they instead of having the bank sell, they would issue bonds to the bank. And their charter was to go from 1933 to 1936. They also extended the loan payment to 15 years. So while their loan activity was just from 1933 to 36, the Homeowners Loan Corporation itself was in business through 1951 until the last of the 15-year mortgages had been either serviced or lost. They made these loans. They were at the height of their activity. They were processing 35,000 applications a week. They had 400 offices nationwide, and this is before computers. Not everybody had electricity. It's not clear we had even telephones. Okay, so this was a massive effort. They employed thousands and thousands of people. And by the time they were done making loans, they had, it says 20%, but I read as high as 30% of all the mortgage debt in the United States was owned by the Homeowners Loan Corporation. The next thing to come along to help homeowners was the Federal Housing Administration. This was established in 1934. And the purpose of the Federal Housing Administration was not, again, to make loans directly to consumers, but to insure loans granted by financial institutions. So probably many of you had FHA loans, but they're not really your loans. They were insurance to your bank. And the FHA really changed the whole idea of home mortgages, extending the payment period, some at 20, 25 years, maybe 10% down. So this really made it possible for many, many people to get into home ownership that didn't have that opportunity before. Well, having a portfolio of about $4.5 billion, the Homeowners Loan Corporation in 1935 decided to create these maps. Now, how many of you are familiar with these maps? Have you seen a couple of you? Okay, great, yeah. So they decided to create these maps, and it's not exactly clear what their logic was. They owned this massive portfolio of about $4.5 billion worth of debt. And so they created these maps ostensibly to sort of suggest areas where their portfolio might be at higher risk, where it might be at less risk. They created maps for about 239 cities across the country, a population 40,000 or more, of which about 150 of these maps were found in the National Archives in the 80s and 90s. So that's when this history was really sort of brought back to light. So what inspectors did is they scoured the country and they drew maps for every city. As to over 40,000 population, including some really strange places. If we have time, I'll show you some later on. But they graded each section into one of 4 categories, A, B, C, and D. And they called the green section the best. It was where they thought, okay, our portfolio is going to be the safest, okay, it's safest to make loans here. The blue is the B grade, it's still desirable. The C grade is kind of, again, these maps are old, they're faded, it's sort of this yellowish color, declining area. And the red is hazardous, and hence the name redlining, because you can see up here there's a number of areas that are highlighted in red. So local inspectors, which included real estate professionals, developers, bankers, others that had a construction people, they would actually go and walk these neighborhoods, take notes, make observations, fill out forms, and then they would go back to their office and draw these things and color code them in. The HOLC actually put out a prototype map, and they kind of showed how to do this. So it was based to a large extent on the inspector's subjective opinions, but they also looked at home sales and who lived there and who didn't live there. And as we will see, there were very few African Americans, if any, living in any of the areas that were called best or still desirable. And by the 1930s, by the way, those are the Pittsburgh historians will know that Pittsburgh neighborhoods had been largely established by then. So there was the Hill District, there was Squirrel Hill, Homewood. So there are areas that have had distinct identities for many, many years. And this sort of, you can't say cause and effect, but this sort of helped lock things in over the generations. So here's the Pittsburgh map from 1937. And recall that their loan-making authority extended through 1936. So these maps were actually made after most of the HOLC loans had been granted. And again, they made these so that they would have a better picture of their own portfolios. And they were used by the FHA and private lenders and so on over many, many years. Historians kind of disagree on the cause and effect. Were the maps really used to discriminate, or did they sort of facilitate it and catalyze it? But the maps were out there. You can see in Pittsburgh, there's a few green areas, and there's a few here, and a little bit, and that's it. Okay, those are the best areas in Pittsburgh. You can see a tremendous, there's a few blue areas. Whoop, I think I'm advancing my slides here, aren't I?
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's go back. There are a few blue areas, and you can see there's a whole lot of the yellow and a whole lot of the red. So think back on it. We're going to come back to that in a little bit, and you'll see as we talk about the legacy what that means. But just notice where the best areas are and the still desirable and so on. And you will recognize these neighborhoods, right? So people live where they live, and by the 1930s, Pittsburgh had a reputation of being a very, shall we say, segregated place. Well, let's look at some detail here. There's a little blow-up area. This area here, you can see, if you can read this well, you can see the Squirrel Hill area, you can see the Hill District, you can see East Liberty, you can see Greenfield. So we will look at these in some detail, but again, please note that there's not a heck of a lot of green here. There's a whole lot of yellow and there's a whole lot of red. And when we look at these, you will note that basically there are no African Americans living in the green or the blue areas in Pittsburgh. And this was true in cities across the country, by the way, not just in Pittsburgh. And according to the standards of the time, the appraising standards of the time, this was well documented that the HOLC assumed and insisted that the residency of African Americans immigrants, as well as working class whites, compromise the values of homes and the security of mortgages. This was actually kind of written into the underwriting documents of the era, so it was part of the things they took into consideration. Pittsburgh has approximately 113 of these rating sheets. These are all available online. And what they did is the inspectors went through and they looked at these various factors. They filled out these rating sheets. Like, what are the favorable influences? Is it near shopping? Is it convenient? Is it up to date? They looked at detrimental influences. They looked at who lived there. They looked at the sales history. They looked at the age and quality of the buildings. They looked at the trend of desirability and the clarifying remarks. So you will forgive me as I read some of this material to you. So this was the best area, one of the best areas. So this is Squirrel Hill, and you can see Homewood Cemetery, and you can see this is area A5. This is a summary of the remarks on these documents. So I'll read this to you. One of the best sections in the city limits. Houses from $15,000 to $25,000 predominate. Section is threatened with Jewish encroachment from the south. 4th Street frontage is expected to be zoned for apartments. Can you guys read this? I mean, I would rather, all right, I'll read it to you as much as I'd rather not, but I will. Infiltration, Jewish threatening, relief families, no. So there were millions of families on government relief, so this suggests that in this section of Squirrel Hill there were none. Foreign-born, none. Negro, no.
Panning on it.
Type executives and so on. It says highly desirable residential area, good transportation and shopping center, good
So there'll
elevation.
be 2 files.
So that's Squirrel Hill, what we think of it.
But it's showing up really well.
I'm sorry?
The
I
gray
hope the colors are. The
Oh, what is
colors
the
aren't
gray
coming
areas?
up on them.
I just highlighted this, so everything else kind of turned
Fewer
gray.
there, but it's.
Well, I highlighted this. Yeah. It's blue, yeah. So here's another section. You can see this is by Frick Park and Cemetery, A7. A small section of good character, well protected from encroachment. Infiltration of desirable. Okay, so this is estimated family income, $5,000 and over. Detrimental influence is nominal. So this is a good place to live. This is, if you can read the Shaw Avenue, and it's right near Frick Park, and you can kind of, you guys know where this is. Well, let's look at a couple other examples. This is Squirrel Hill, we call it maybe Squirrel Hill South. This was still desirable area, and you can see on the map where it was near the cemetery in Frick Park. Again, this stuff sticks in my throat, so forgive me, I'm going to read it anyway. Clarifying remarks, slight Jewish encroachment. 2 new apartments built off Murray Avenue, considerable commercial building on Murray Avenue near Forbes, very active business center. Infiltration of, possibly Jewish. Foreign-born, no. Negro, no. Relief families, nominal. Upper middle class. And they liked it. This was a second category. This was the blue one. Good transportation, good schools, convenient shopping district, close to parks. This is section B14, which is sort of on our lower left here. Clarifying remarks. I wish you could all read this, so I didn't have to read it to you, but strong Jewish influence of fair to lower class Jew. Infiltration of Jewish. Relief families nominal. Foreign-born 5 to 8%. Negro no. White collar class. Estimated income $2,500 and up. Detrimental influences nominal. So that's a typical blue area, which was the second. Still desirable. Then we get into a little bit more of the as they call it, declining areas. This is Morningside. This is considered a good working man's district with houses of modest character, always in good demand. Section lies out of the flooded area. Infiltration of foreign relief families, moderately heavy. Again, these are people that are on government relief programs. Foreign-born, mixture, 35%. Negro, no. Skilled and common labor, annual income, $1,500 to $2,500. So if you recall our first Squirrel Hill thing, this is about in a family income about 1/10 of our first Squirrel Hill. Detrimental influences, none except the age of the property. This was a hazardous area, East Liberty. I'll read it. Land values on Penn Avenue in East Liberty between Frankstown and Highland Avenue range from $10,000 to $15,000. It is a shopping center for the entire East End district. Chain stores and mail order houses located here. Larimer Avenue is the shopping center for Italian population. Eastern end of this section is best. No market for row houses. Single houses average $1,500 to $5,000. About 60% of the owner-occupied homes are mortgaged. Infiltration of Italian and Negro. Relief families, very heavy. Foreign-born, Greek and Italian, 30%. Negro, yes, 30%. Type labor. Annual income, $800 to $1,200. Detrimental influences. Obsolescence, poor condition of structures, lower class populace. You can see that the prejudice in the vocabulary of these inspectors, they were actually following accepted appraisal practices and vocabulary at the time, but now it's just painful to read this material. This is probably the most difficult of them all. This is the Hill District, D10. I'll read it again here. Clarifying remarks, considerable Jewish throughout the Fifth Avenue section. Demolition for tax purposes and poor condition. Values of residential structures is expected to continue down. Rentals have about reached a peak now. Northeast corner is the best of the entire section, north of Webster and east of Morgan. The poorest area in the territory bounded by Fifth Avenue, Congress Street, Bedford, and Aaron Street has been mentioned for slum clearance. Inhabitants, infiltration of Negro. Foreign-born, mixture 20%. Negro, yes, 50%. Relief families, heavy, type labor. Annual income, $1,000 to $3,000. Detrimental influences, I can hardly read it. Concentration of Negro and undesirables, very congested. There are a lot of immigrant populations, of African American populations. These are the ones that sort of came in the yellow and red zones of these. Well, here's a little bit of legacy. So we know that, history, neighborhood means a lot. And where you grow up has a major influence on your life. In fact, I think I read some research that said like your zip code is one of the most powerful determiners of your life trajectory. I mean, you start out at disadvantage, and it's very difficult to overcome that disadvantage. So if you look at demographics today, areas that were noted as the best areas in the 1930s are now almost 80% white. The hazardous areas are just a little over half white. And I don't know what the African American population percentage of Pittsburgh is, but you wouldn't, even in the hazardous areas, I'm not sure what to expect. It's about half white. Home values. Yes, please.
the last screen, the last thing you had up on the screen, on the bottom it said the last legacy of redlining, 538. Is there something significant about 538 on the bottom there?
538, I can't remember the guy's name, but he used to use this as a site for predicting elections, because 538 voting.
Nate Silver.
Yeah, it's still, so they do all kinds of research and so on. So this is the site where they publish this material.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. This is a very small sample, just to kind of be suggestive to you. So these are median home value sales in July of 2025. And we're talking small samples, in the dozens and not the hundreds or the thousands or the tens of thousands over years. But I think this is suggestive. In the areas that, and this is true nationwide, by the way, it's not just here in Pittsburgh, but the areas that were related, that were coded best back then generally have the highest home values now. And the areas that were coded red back then, in general, have the lowest home values now. Again, this is a small sample, but it's suggestive. The Allegheny Health Department every so often creates an index they call the Community Need Index. And what they do is they look at every community in the city, and there's a number of factors that they look at. They looked at the rate of poverty, they looked at the number of homes headed by single women, they looked at unemployment of males under the age of 65, they look at gun violence, they look at homicides, they look at average incomes and so on. And they take all these factors and then they boil them down into a single need index. And you can see on this map the coding. So the darkest areas here are areas they call extreme need. The next is high need, moderate need, low need, and very low need. You can see Squirrel Hill, Shady Side, so on, is basically very, very low need. And if you recall the redlining maps we looked at earlier, I think you can see that areas of high need and extreme need match pretty closely with the areas that were redlined and yellow lined. Let me illustrate that a little more carefully here. So what I did was I combined these two, yes please.
In terms of the redlining, did the HOLC not give the loans to the black population?
That's a great question. The question was, did the HOLC not give the loans to the black population?
Because when I think of redlining, that's what I think that they did not.
Well, actually, it turns out they did. The HOLC loan activity was actually pretty well colorblind. But the maps then suggested to the FHA and private lenders and kind of everybody else that these are areas where prudence dictates that you may or may not want to make a loan. So basically they lumped whole neighborhoods together and they said this is hazardous. But the HOLC had a pretty good reputation for taking over these loans from just about everybody that applied and could qualify. So yeah, great question, thank you. So what this map shows is the areas that HOLC called declining or hazardous, the yellow or the red areas back in the 30s. And I overlaid this with those areas that were of extreme or high need. And those of you, I mean, you know Pittsburgh and you know demographics probably as well or much better than I do. So you can see areas, it used to be like Allegheny City on the north side of the river. You can see Homewood here, East Hills, Hazelwood. So these are areas that I think we know now are, well, they're disadvantaged. I mean, so again, this is very suggestive. Can you say cause and effect? not really, but you can say that patterns and systems and patterns of discrimination and urbanization and highways and so white flight really locked in a bunch of this history. This is a heat map of Pittsburgh homicides. In the year between 2007 and 2024, there were recorded 1,872 homicides. And this is a heat map that shows you where these homicides occurred. And the color coding is this: the bright yellow is the hottest area, the bright red is the next hottest, and so on. So again, you can see, depending on where you live and where you look, I guess you guys can interpret this, right? There's a definite, I would say, association between neighborhoods and homicides.
Real quick,
Yeah.
is that, we're at Squirrel Hill North, right at the corner of Point Breeze, is that from the Tree of Life?
That I don't know. That I do not know. Any comments, questions on this? So this, again, this is part of the, I guess I would say, the legacy. There's been a whole lot of literature describing the historical discrimination patterns. And, you know, it turns out that, you know, we could have done other maps showing indicators of health, indicators of poverty, indicators of other types of disadvantage. But these are some things that have been published that I came across I thought were suggestive and interesting. Historical discriminatory housing practices may influence heart disease risk and factors and outcomes today. Nearly 50 million Americans are exposed to higher levels of air pollution as a result of discriminatory redlining policies decades after the practice was officially outlawed. And by the way, in the Fair Housing Act of 1968 officially put an end to all of this, but you know, we know that maybe it really didn't quite. Historical government-sanctioned residential segregation through redlining was found to be associated with higher proportions of people living with visual impairment and blindness in these neighborhoods today. Life expectancy from red and yellow areas in Baltimore is about 5 years shorter than those categorized as green or blue. I think this would be true just about everywhere, by the way, not just in Baltimore. Historical redline neighborhoods experience contemporary determinants of health conditions that are less conducive to health compared with those in non-redline neighborhoods. These differences also reflect the accumulation of resources essential for health in greenline neighborhoods. Heat islands. Again, if you look at like Pittsburgh tree canopy and where the parks are and recreation and stuff, I think you can kind of see this on your own. And 94% of the HOL cities formerly redlined derated areas were significantly hotter during the summer when compared to the greenline neighborhoods, the nationwide average being about 5 degrees. If you have, I want to show you a few more maps, by the way, and then I'll take, if we have a few minutes, I'll take a couple of questions, but I want to show you a few more maps just to show you some places that you might be familiar with. This is Erie, and I had to look long and hard before I found a green area. And you can see it's up on the left, right on the lake shore there. I mean, this place was, and one of the class projects I had students do was to look at conditions today where there is persistent poverty and health, very poor health, and it turns out it matches almost perfectly, you know, with this map. They even went to Altoona, for Pete's sake. Must have had 40,000 people back in Altoona. Here you can see, if your vision is a couple of little green areas, the rest of it is red and yellow. Johnstown. I could not find a single green zone in Johnstown. I don't know this Johnstown very well, but something, you know, that these inspectors found there just didn't really sit well with them. This is Cleveland. And we have the same kind of chart here. There's a few green areas, a lot of red, a lot of yellow.
What are the dates of these maps?
Late 30s, 35 to 37, 1935 to 1937. You can see the population in Cleveland in the best area today is probably 3/4 white. In the hazardous areas, maybe 1/4 white. So this is legacy, okay? These maps are now 90 years old, but still the issues persist. I'm not from Chicago, but if you are, you may recognize here are a few green areas and lots of red and yellow. Chicago South. I think this is where our National Guard would be stationed. You know, my mother was from Duluth, Minnesota, and they even had a map, you know, for Duluth, for Pete's sake. I mean, it was really odd. Just to kind of finalize it, this was the Realtor Code of Ethics from 1924. In the interpretation of his obligations, he can take no safer guide than that which has been handed down through 20 centuries, embodied in the Golden Rule. Whatsoever ye would that men should do unto you, do ye also unto them. Accepting this standard as his own, every realtor pledges himself to observe its spirit in all his dealings and to conduct his business in accordance with the following code of ethics, adopted by the National Association of Real Estate Boards. And in the code of ethics, by the way, is this statement. A realtor should never be instrumental in introducing a neighborhood, a character of property or occupancy, members of any race or nationality, or any individuals whose presence will clearly be detrimental to property values in that neighborhood. This was their code of ethics. So, just to wrap up here, I just want to give you a brief anecdote about, let's see.
Who decides?
I'm sorry?
Who decides who the detrimental groups are?
I think it was sort of understood. In fact, I mean, we saw, you know, infiltration of Jewish, we saw infiltration of immigrants, we saw infiltration of black, you know. I think it was kind of unwritten. Let me just give you a little more current example, which I came across the other day. It's the story of Francis and Roland Barnes. Anybody know this? So,
Museum?
pardon?
Barnes Museum in Philadelphia?
Don't know, could be. So these folks were both PhDs, they were both educators, they were black, they bought a home. So in 1948, it became illegal to enforce what they called racial covenants. And in tens of millions of deeds across the United States, there was language written into it. This property may never be sold, occupied, deeded to a person of, you kind of fill in the blank. I mean, hardly anybody I knew would ever be eligible for anything. But, so these folks bought a home in the late 50s near Washington, D.C., and by then it was illegal to enforce these covenants. But I saw a copy of their deed which basically, you know, these folks were black, and it basically said this home may never be sold, leased, deeded to, occupied by anybody of certain, and it was still in their deed. Well, eventually they came to Pittsburgh, and Roland, they both had doctorate degrees, they're both educators. Roland was the first black full professor at Pitt. In 1974, they tried to buy a home in Point Breeze. And when the neighbors found out that this was a black couple, they circulated a petition to try to keep them out, and they gave that to the realtor, and they passed it on to the homeowner, begging them not to sell it to these folks. This is recently as 1974. Wow. So, with that, we'll go back and see if there are any questions, comments, thoughts. Yes, please.
What was the municipality that you came across in your research that had the highest prevalence of green districts?
What municipality?
Yeah, like any certain city stood out that was overwhelmingly green?
I haven't looked like nationwide, but that'd be a really great question. But I suspect there were not a whole lot of them, you know. Please, yes.
Is it your interpretation that much of the unfortunate discrimination that occurred for years after the Roosevelt administration depended on the maps that were drawn in the Depression years under the Roosevelt administration? Or that there was some other cause for the discriminatory practices?
You know, discrimination was not a new thing. I mean, you know, during Reconstruction, after the Civil War, neighborhoods became established. There was a lot of African Americans migrated to northern cities, Cleveland, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Milwaukee. And, you know, you lived where you could afford, you lived where you could work, you lived where there were communities where you felt like you could kind of fit in. And I think by the 30s, various neighborhoods were really pretty well established, where there were immigrant populations, there were white populations, there was African American populations, and so on and so on.
Is there any fault to be found in the maps that were developed during the Roosevelt administration?
You could never say cause and effect. I think the maps sort of the catalyst to kind of keep these legacies going. It's not clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not clear who really used them and when they were used, but they were kind of the legal basis to discriminate. Yeah, please.
These maps that you're showing are from what, the 30s and 40s?
No, they're from 1935 to 1937.
1935 to 1937. But when I look at those areas, to me, the areas of high value, high incomes, high property values today pretty well mirror what the areas were back then. So
Exactly.
nothing has really changed in terms of the development of these neighborhoods over time. The ones that were poor stayed poor. The ones that were relatively well-to-do stayed well-to-do.
There's a lot of literature that suggests, you know, where you grow up, where you live, you know, the child, that kind of puts some rails around your life trajectory, and, you know, if you're lucky, you can, please, and then one, and then, yeah.
A couple comments. One was, yeah, it's not totally true what he's saying about, like, I know Wilkinsburg, I think at the turn of the century, was entirely, like, Waspic. There were no Catholic churches or anywhere in Wilkinsburg. That has definitely changed in the demographic. But the most curious category is what it says foreign. I mean, what does that, I mean, anyone who's, unless you're Native American, I mean, everyone is foreign.
We're all foreign, yeah, I mean, it's, at some point, I'm guessing it would probably be first generation, or obviously foreign, like if your household didn't speak English or something, yeah. Could we have that, please?
So one reason why the legacy matters for health and like life outcomes, one of the arguments that somebody is making, a law professor, is that you really build infrastructure. You know, the red line areas, the red areas, had infrastructure sort of separating them from the green areas. And like, so for instance, you know, the Hill District, you know, or the parts of Pittsburgh that really have infrastructure that goes, you know, that discriminates against neighborhoods. Do you think they, you know, just going to his question, do you think they, you know, the people who, is there any evidence that they use those maps, you know, when they were planning infrastructure projects?
Yeah, the question was, is there any evidence that developers that use these maps when they're planning infrastructure projects.
It sort of made that sort of badness about those neighborhoods persist.
Well,
One of the mechanisms.
I couldn't give you specific examples, but we know that building freeways and highways often destroyed, neighborhoods, and it wasn't the green or the best neighborhoods that were ever destroyed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's typically the less
Right.
less advantaged. I mean, I saw that even where I grew up in Minnesota. I saw that, over time. But you didn't realize that at the time. You thought these were, new infrastructure and development and so on. So it would be an interesting question, but I don't doubt for a second that developers and urban planners took these into account. Yeah.
Same thing could be said for using these maps to develop zoning district definitions. So this was a red district on the map before. Let's make this commercial, or open up light industrial land uses, and if it's a green zone, leave it for single family housing.
Yeah, the comment was these maps could have been used also to set up zoning.
Yeah.
Please.
I find a little difference with the current maps than with these other maps too, because you can still redline an area, and it's done. I personally know it. And it's just that idea of like, how is it a lending agency isn't going to use these to discriminate? They can take a whole area and say, I'm not going to loan in Beachview.
I think we have a comment on it. Do we have another comment? Yes, and then we have at least one online.
I had a friend who told me that hers was the first Jewish family to buy a house on Kipling Road, which is off of Wilkins Avenue near Carnegie Mellon, and that there had been a gentleman's agreement from everybody on the street not to sell to any Jewish families, and the person that sold her house got a lot of hate mail and anonymous phone calls and things like that. And I'm just wondering, are these gentlemen agreements, are they the same as the redlining?
Are these gentlemen agreements the same as the redlining? Human behavior, it is what it is. People are going to do what they're going to do what they do. I understand this perfectly well, but my parents were one of the first Jewish families to move into their neighborhood, and they experienced a certain level of vitriol, as well back in Minnesota. So yeah.
If you had been influential in the Roosevelt administration, trying to help the people whose properties were underwater, what would you have done differently, if anything?
The question is, what would I do if I were part of the Roosevelt administration trying to help people? I think you're several levels above my pay grade. I think, the HO, I think their intentions were honorable. I mean, they saved they subsidized over 1 million homeowners in the 3 years that they were doing this. And the maps didn't really come until after they were done with their loan activities. So it was others that took this nefarious material and started to use it. What would I do? I don't know. It's a hard.
We have a question on Zoom.
Yeah, can you see it? Can I see it? Let's see.
Toby?
Toby, are you
Oh
there?
yeah, can you hear me?
We
Yeah.
can.
Okay, I just wanted to point out an amazing article that's very relevant to this by Ta-Nehisi Coates in the Atlantic on the case for reparations. And you can Google it and find it, and it really talks in depth about the effects of redlining, the inability of black soldiers to take advantage of home buying, after the war, and veterans' rights, and that home ownership is a form of wealth for the families that can be and hence the importance of home ownership. So, it's really a great article to read.
Okay, good, thank you. We have maybe one more question? Please.
In the 60s and 70s and 80s, there was a real estate company in New York called the Trump Corporation that was taken to court many, 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 many times for redlining and found guilty and fined, and it just went on and on and on. If it's against the law and you're found guilty of doing it, what is the penalty?
President of the United States,
That's what happened. Well, I was gonna say, the easy answer, for any corporation, it's easier to just pay the fine than to change your behavior.
Right, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Take negligence.
sure, a fine. And, you know, these laws are, these laws are very difficult. So the Barnes family that I mentioned, they actually tried to buy another home in, just outside of DC. And when the homeowner and the realtor discovered they were a black family, they gave them back their deposit and said the sale is off. Well, they took this case, appealed it to the Supreme Court, and unfortunately the Barnes family, they actually lost the case. And that's one of the reasons I think they decided to move to Pittsburgh, which I'm not sure was. We have one more question.
Does that also work in reverse? Or actually, if you're trying to get your home appraised and you're black, there's a recent case of this where the home appraisal came in low for a black family. So what they did was they, whitewashed their house. They put up pictures of a white family, and they put up, and they took down any art that could be African American, and they had a white guy standing there as if he was the homeowner when the appraiser came in, and it was significantly higher. So it is still happening today.
It also happens with job applications too, right? If your resume is suggestive that you're white, you would tend to get more callbacks and higher offers than if it's, otherwise. Well, I'm kind of thinking we're just about at our time limit, so thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, very interesting. We have a deal where you help put the chairs back. You guys have been here before, so we're gonna start them over here.
Be careful,